Thank you for kicking off your conference with us here in this room. Our presentation is From Science to Action, Enabling Resilient Puget Sound Shorelines Through Research, Education, Outreach, and Policy. My name is Fishman, and I'm with Washington Sea Grant, and I'm really excited to bring you this panel today. First, just a few logistical notes. Our intention is, we have 4 speakers today, and our intention is to have plenty of time at the end for a robust conversation. And so if there's time after each presentation, we might ask some clarifying questions, but if you have a more in-depth question, which I hope you will, please hold that to the end so we can make sure to leave time for that discussion. And then before I pass it off to our speakers, I think there are a few takeaways, goals, lenses that might help frame up this conversation. So if I can just plant some seeds in your head. Today, you're going to be hearing about work in the Puget Sound region of Washington State, about some ongoing work that's been happening for over a decade to help our Puget Sound landowners address coastal hazards like erosion. And increasingly, climate hazards are becoming a part of that conversation. So we're going to hear about kind of that shifting or expanding range of outreach today. We have a need for, and we are taking steps to message these different adaptation options, and that's being informed by new and timely science, which you're also going to hear about today. And those adaptation options kind of span the range of some of the things that we heard about earlier, including staying in place, adapting, and perhaps even relocating. We have a big region with a lot of actors, and so collaboration is key. I think the span of people that we have on our panel today, from state government, local government, nonprofits, and the private sector, is really indicative of the collaboration in our region. Because really we need to collaborate, because at the end of the day, we have tens of thousands of individual decision makers across our Puget Sound shorelines who are trying to decide what's best for their property, for their families, perhaps for the habitat and the health of Puget Sound, and we can't do it together. So we have to collaborate. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our 4 presenters. First, we'll be hearing from Bob Warinner. He's with our state's Recreation and Conservation Office. He'll be giving an overview of our region. Second, we have Lauren Ode-Giles. She's a GIS analyst with Warinner Environmental Consulting, and she'll be talking about some new science to inform our knowledge of coastal hazards. Third, we have Lisa Kaufman. She's the Director of Programs with the Northwest Straits Foundation, and she runs their Short Friendly program. She'll be talking about that outreach and that translation of science into action with our landowners. And finally, Chris Elder. He's a watershed planner with Whatcom County, one of our local governments in Washington, and he'll be talking about the county's adaptation planning. So with that, I would like to pass it off to Bob to introduce our Puget Sound.
Hello, everybody. So again, I'm Bob Warinner with Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. So I'm just going to touch on Puget Sound a little bit, and then talk about our program called Shore Friendly. And just kind of give you an overview of what we're doing. Okay, so this is Puget Sound. As I'm sure most of you are familiar with the city of Seattle. Seattle is right in the middle of Puget Sound here. And this is kind of Puget Sound proper. Our Shore Friendly program goes through kind of the extended Puget Sound up here in these areas in the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the Strait of Georgia. Puget Sound is a deep fjord, basically created by the polar ice sheets. So it's a very deep kind of estuary. It's also surrounded by accumulations of glacial sediments, and we'll talk about why that's important in a second. This is Bellingham. 5 of the 6 of us here are from Bellingham. It's a beautiful place. I'm just telling you that's where we live, and you have a spare bedroom in my house if you want to come visit. So we have rocky shorelines, estuaries, embayments, and but I'm going to talk mostly about our beaches with fine and gravel sediments, because that's kind of where our focus is with this Shore Friendly program. This is a bluff-backed beach, as we call it, and this bluff is composed of glacial sediments that were put down during the ice sheet. And the reason this type of beach is important is because we have erosion at the toe of this bluff, and that provides sediment in the form of sand and gravel, which is important for a reason I'll tell you in a second. The other type of beach that we really kind of focus on with our shore-friendly program are these sediment depositional beaches, sometimes called barrier beaches. And these beaches accumulate sediment from nearshore drift along drift cells that come from places like the bluff back beaches and from river deltas and so on. So you can see there's a lagoon back here, that's a barrier lagoon. That's why it's called a barrier beach. So the reason that these types of beaches are important is because one of the focus species that we have for our work are forage fish, and they spawn in the gravels and sand here. And so specifically we have sand lance, surf smelt, and herring that spawn a little bit further in the near shore. The reason forage fish are important is because Pacific salmon forage on forage fish, that's why they're called forage fish. And so that's kind of one of their mainstays of their diet. And we get, you know, in Washington, just to be honest, we get most of our funding for habitat restoration for Pacific salmon. It's kind of like one of the key species that we're concerned about. We have 5 species of Pacific salmon in Puget Sound, and there's a lot of work to restore that. Also, orca is another species in Puget Sound that's of concern, and orcas, we have a special population of orca in Puget Sound that is threatened, and they feed primarily on salmon, specifically Chinook salmon, and so it's another reason that we are concerned about providing forage fish for the salmon. And then another species we have in Puget Sound are these guys. I stole this picture from before, so sorry whoever got that picture. But it's just such a perfect picture. So Puget Sound has about 60% private ownership. And so along with that private ownership, we have a huge amount of private residences that live along the shore of Puget Sound. And I like this picture because obviously you can see that how people are living really close to the shore often. And kind of the focus of Shore Friendly is to reduce the impact of bank hardening or armoring along the shoreline. So you can see in this photo, there's this long seawall, and that seawall has kind of the impacts on habitat that seawalls have and other bank armoring is a reduction of the fine sediments that I had talked about earlier. So if you look in 3 different ways, really mainly. One is if you look on this part of it, you can see my, oh yeah, you can. It'll keep the sediments from doing the nearshore drift, and so it will starve beaches downstream of that from sediments. We'll have erosion right at the toe of the hardening, and that will just do erosion that will remove the sediments in the habitat. And then finally, if you look down here, there's a bluff that can be isolated by these this hardening, and then so you're not getting that source of that really important source of sediments and gravels. And so for this, we need to address those seawalls and that beach hardening. But the issue is we have associated with that private ownership, we have, I think it's like 50,000, almost 50,000 private landowners, right? So we have just thousands and thousands of these little tiny lots that surround Puget Sound. And in order to address this situation, we have to kind of think about restoration in a different kind of lens. So like most of our restoration practitioners are tribes or local governments, or I mean state governments and nonprofits that are doing like big projects that you can kind of attack them with one landowner, even though there's a couple hundred acres, and you can do significant restoration without a whole lot of just upfront work, right? It's still difficult, but it's not simple like this. And so when Shore Friendly was first thought of, we were thinking that it really needs to be kind of a local effort with organizations that have the capacity to reach out to landowners in a much more intimate way. So Shore Friendly was born, and with a pilot project funded by the EPA and facilitated from Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Recreation Conservation Office to really work with local entities that each have a specific geographic envelope that they can kind of work in and really try to make a difference and try to chip away at these small landowners to do kind of incremental work that can add together to become a a more significant restoration. And so, like I said, it's a local focus. They're at the scale, the local scale, so they have capacity to work at a local scale where they can send out lots of mailers and get a lot of people interested. They can attend home shows and things like that and have a presence in their community and really kind of get people interested in working with us. But it is local, but we do have a regional kind of collaboration, and I'll discuss that in 1 second. But so the idea is with these local entities, lead organizations as we call them, they can do the outreach that's needed, but then we provide incentives to the landowners. And so they can have technical assistance. If you do that, we do the outreach and we discover opportunities to do restoration or avoidance of armor. We can provide technical assistance through regional experts on shoreline geology, like design, permitting, and so on. And then we can do cost share, so we can actually take the projects to implementation with a small amount of funding that we can provide to the landowner. And the idea is to have the landowner collaborate with us, and so it's just a cost share program. Sometimes the projects are really large, and so they go into a different type of grant program, but it's really trying to just find the opportunities and then get them to the project implementation. And so the regional part of Shore Friendly is we have, one of the things is we base our work on science. We have quite a bit of information that we've gathered over the years through different efforts and through the Shore Friendly efforts to really kind of identify what projects or what opportunities we have throughout Puget Sound. So we have this parcel segmentation that I think you're going to hear about a little bit more today, where we've looked at every parcel in Puget Sound to determine how possible it is to do restoration there, what issues there are, if they really do have erosion problems where a seawall is actually needed. And but then we also have the social marketing survey where we've interviewed landowners throughout Puget Sound to really determine what they need, what they think they need, what their behaviors are on their shoreline, and also kind of their appetite or their willingness to do restoration on their land. But it's also kind of trying to change perspective from the value of a seawall compared to the value of a nice, functioning, more attractive, in my opinion, shoreline that will also have habitat benefits. So this is kind of my collaboration slide. So we collaborate so we have 6 different entities that have been funded through Shore Friendly. But we also have the state, like me at RCO and WDFW, Washington Fish and Wildlife, Sea Grant, and Northwest Straits, even though they're one of the leads, are also kind of integrated into this collaboration where we have a constant or a consistent message across Puget Sound, but we also share resources like websites. There's videos that are produced that are shared across the leads, and we have really been able to take the lessons learned and apply them throughout Puget Sound. We meet monthly and we can really talk about what's working and what might not be working. And really, we're kind of really focusing on making this a successful thing through lessons learned. We also have a team of regional experts that we've kind of collaborated, and it's a small team, but they work throughout Puget Sound with consultants that we all know who they are, they all know who we are, and it's really becoming effective because they're really honing their skills to come to this kind of small level, landowner parcel level restoration. Just one other thing. And so one of the things that we do, and this is just an example of this part of the collaboration, is we provide education to landowners with experts doing basically classes. This is a workshop. This is Andrea, and she's a geologist that works with one of the consulting firms. And they provide this education for the landowners to help them understand what the alternatives are on their shoreline. And then, they introduce the Shore Friendly program and help people get excited about it. But also, we provide these classes to what we call the influencers. And that's, for example, the people that are actually doing the construction on the shoreline. And so we're helping them change their kind of perspective as well. And so when a landowner comes to them for a seawall or something like that, they kind of have a much broader list of alternatives instead of just your traditional bank hardening. We've also doing that with the planners, which is kind of another level of influencer, as we call it. So when people go to the local entity for permitting, they can not only be comfortable with new kind of ideas of what can be done on the shoreline, but also can help provide alternatives for that type of work. Now, this is very short. There's way more information, and so you'll hear more of it here. But if you guys want to talk about it, I'm perfectly available after this, and we could get into shore friendly much more intimately.
Thanks, Bob. I think we have a couple minutes for clarifying questions. Was there any questions on Zoom? Okay. Any clarifying questions for Bob before we move on to our next presenter? Yeah, go for it.
Very nice presentation. I'm really not on that part of the science, but it's so interesting. One very tiny question that I had was, is there I'm not so familiar with the region, so is it mostly resident, whole year resident, or is it also secondary houses, and what's the share of
Wow, we just talked about that question right before we came in. Yes, okay, this is a different type of scenario than what we listened to this morning. A lot of these houses are second family or second homes, and so we are dealing with a demographic that is quite privileged often. Some of these places are not. Some of them are houses that have been in the family for decades or generations. And those people do actually need some financial assistance but a lot of times, you're right. We're dealing with people that have privilege. And I think that's one of the important things about the program is independent of the money. It's trying to change the attitude and behavior of the landowners. And so even if we don't help them with money, we can have people have a better perspective on what really should be installed on the shoreline.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
Yeah, one more question.
Hi, Nicole Beaker, Integral Consulting. My office is in Seattle. I've grown up in Seattle, so it's very close to home. Clarifying question, I have some more for you later, but this program is completely voluntary?
Yes.
That's it?
God, that's a great question.
That's an important question, and I don't know if anyone's are you gonna get into the regulatory side? Okay, there are definitely a lot of regulatory changes too in this space, as you might know from living there, but yes, shore friendly is completely voluntary. All right, thank you so much, Bob. Now we're gonna pass it to Lauren. Lauren, you can introduce yourself, but you'll be hearing about some cool new science now.
All right. Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for sitting in on this session on day one of the MR 2025 conference. My name is Lauren Ode-Giles. I'm a GIS analyst for Herrera Environmental Consultants, and I get the privilege of working really closely with Lisa on a lot of her shore-friendly implementation, which you'll get to hear about next. I'm curious, do we have any other GIS enthusiasts in the house? Awesome, that makes me happy. Okay, great. So I might get just a touch more into the GIS weeds than I would have initially, but I'll keep it contained because this is where I live my life. Yeah, so the name of this talk is Move It, Methods and Findings of the Bluff Recession GIS Analysis for Retreat or Burger Study. I have to tip my hat to my colleague Andrea for coming up with the acronym on that one. What is this project? So this study was conducted by Herrera Environmental Consultants with feedback and funding and strategic support from the Northwest Straits Foundation. As Sydney described and as Bob described, much of the Salish Sea shoreline is under private ownership. And a lot of the low-hanging fruit of projects where it's easy for us to find an enthusiastic landowner who has a property where we can safely remove armor and restore the shoreline. We've been at this for a minute and we've found a lot of those people and we've done a lot of those projects. And so now it's getting a little more complicated to figure out where we can effectively use our resources to promote long-term habitat suitability and to promote shoreline resilience to climate change and restore a lot of the natural nearshore processes that do resist and respond to climate change. And so this was a remote assessment to try to figure out, here's just sort of illustrating that point of things that are under private ownership and things that have hard armor associated with them. That's a graphic from shorefriendly.org. But yeah, this is trying to answer a couple of different questions. We know that armor has negative impacts on the nearshore. We know it reduces habitat suitability for the fish that salmon feed on. But we need to figure a couple of things out. So on these marine bluff properties that provide the sustaining sediment into the Puget Sound nearshore, where are the crests of those bluffs currently located? So as those bluffs continue to erode landward, where are they going to potentially cause impacts to homes and other upland infrastructure that it's really going to make people start to worry and get anxious and want to armor their properties? Where we have building or where we have bluff crests that we've identified their locations of, we want to know if there's nearby buildings. And then if there's a building that's close to a bluff crest, we want to understand, is it possible for us to relocate that building away from the near shore? So this is, we've taken care of a lot of properties where the home is already at a safe setback. Now we're looking at places where doing strategic relocation of properties allows us to either move the home to mitigate the risk and then remove the existing armor, or relocate a home that could become threatened by bluff erosion and then prevent the need or the perceived need for future shore armor. So for this project, we applied this approach to 4 pilot counties, so Clallam, Jefferson, Skagit, and Whatcom. Whatcom County is where many of us are hailing from today. Come visit us. We're very close to Canada. I mean, that's one of my favorite things. So to apply this approach, we picked these 4 pilot counties, and we're fortunate in Washington State that our Department of Natural Resources maintains a really robust program of maintaining LiDAR mapping year over year. So we have very high resolution, very high quality, repeat mapping of local topology. And so from that, we can apply this nifty tool that the USGS came up with called the Cliff Feature Delineation Tool. It was initially developed for shorelines in California, but it allows us to automate the delineation of a bluff crest along shore. When we're applying a study like this to a large geographic area, anything you can do to smooth things along helps. So that was the first thing. We needed to get that bluff crest. It wasn't quite perfect because our shorelines are a little more complicated and kind of weird compared to the ones in California. So the screenshot shows the initial output from that cliff feature delineation tool and what that bluff crest looked like after our coastal geomorphologists had a look at it. And then we had to pull in some other data sets. So we compiled digitized building footprints from OpenStreetMap and Microsoft automated detection tools and other mapping data sources. And we associated that with tax parcels. So that allowed us to say, okay, we're not necessarily gonna move, the Smith's house onto the Johnson's property. So if we're gonna try and figure out where these homes can move, we've gotta put some constraints around it. We also did a little bit of sort of playing with geometry so that if we had a parcel that didn't necessarily intersect with a nearshore data set we were interested in, like a data set that described where armor has been mapped already or where existing forage fish spawning has been documented, we can make those associations and use that to additionally prioritize the outputs of this study. So again, getting back to that key question that we're asking, can we move a house? So I'm just gonna show you a cute little diagram for thinking about this. Here's our parcel, here's our house. So if we have a building on a parcel, is that building within sort of a worrying distance of a bluff crest? Ooh, erosion. All right, so then if we have this kind of situation where there's a house that's within a distance that we're concerned about, we wanna understand, can that house move somewhere else? Sorry, I get too much fun out of the animations in PowerPoint. You just have to humor me. But this is a relatively simple approach to think about, but we had to do this like 4,000 times. So we developed a custom Python script and toolbox to help us answer this question at scale. So this little diagram shows you an example of the output of that tool that we built. So all of the white building polygons that you see, those are sort of the original buildings that were put into the tool. Buildings that are brown are ones that we found couldn't be relocated based on the information that we had. There wasn't sufficient room in the remaining parcel that was outside of that buffered zone for them to be safely moved away. The ones in orange, they could get shifted. And the orange ones are a simple translation. The pink is like, okay, it fits, but only if you kind of like move it a little bit funny. So, you know, more and less complicated things, but it lets us start to characterize what can move. So based on this information and based on those other associations that we made with the parcel boundaries, so associating information about forage fish spawning, associating information about existing armor, we came up with a series of outreach profiles. So trying to characterize what can we actually do with these different properties based on this tool. So we developed these profiles based on whether or not the parcel was armored, whether or not there were threatened buildings on the parcel, and whether or not it was possible to relocate those buildings under certain parameters, because not every building had, you know, a generous 200 feet of remaining parcel that we could work with here. So I'll just step you through this, but this is the general framework that we came up with. So for the unarmored parcels, we looked at buildings that were within a current setback distance of less than 60 feet. And then we came up with a couple of different prioritizations based on things that had the most generous room that they could use for relocation, less generous room, and increasingly less generous room. There were also some homes in which relocation was simply infeasible based on the parameters that we'd set up. For homes that were beyond a setback of 60 feet on an unarmored parcel, then great. If we're doing some outreach in that area, that might be a suitable place to reach out and encourage homeowners to not put armor there, because based on this initial screening that we've applied, it doesn't seem necessary. For armored parcels, similar approach, looking at their current setback. The farther away they could potentially be relocated, the higher our prioritization is for reaching out to that property for relocation to support armor removal. In some instances, didn't seem like it was feasible to relocate that home, and so we need to take a different approach there. And then we also identified some properties on which there was an existing generous setback or there were no threatened buildings and there was armor, so hey, let's get it out of there. So some initial breakdown across our 4 counties. So we found many opportunities for potential armor removal without building relocation. So I'm just gonna move this cute little share screen out of my way so I can see my notes. Yeah, so the green on the chart is opportunities for outright removal, opportunities for removal of armor with building relocation are in blue. Based on the screening criteria that we applied, we found 528 parcels that were top priority for building relocation to enable armor removal across those 4 counties, which is great. And another 768 high priority parcels where armor removal could be outright feasible without building relocation. And there's some caveats on that, but we'll get to those. On the unarmored parcels, there were more unarmored parcels than armored parcels evaluated for the study, which is great. We don't want there to be a ton of armor to start with. And we found a total of 872 parcels that were top priority for building relocation in order to prevent future armor installation. So I'll show you a couple of fun examples around the Sound. This is an example from Skagit County, and this stretch of shoreline has a mix of outreach actions that are sort of scattered across this neighborhood. So a couple where the site didn't really need any modification based on our screening criteria. There wasn't a home that needed to be relocated. There wasn't armor to be removed. A couple of sites where armor removal of either first, second, or third priority was potentially feasible. And then some places that fit into the other outreach profiles. Here's another example from Skagit County where we found a significant cluster, a significant spatial cluster of opportunities for preemptively relocating homes away from an eroding bluff in order to prevent armor removal. So that's potentially an opportunity for us to collaborate with members of a community to do some at-scale work and combine some funds to make things happen more efficiently. And then here's another example from Skagit County with a significant cluster of opportunities for armor removal for home relocation to support armor removal. So that's those sort of teal colored properties. I'll mention that one thing that turned up in the study is that we were able to identify sort of existing challenge locations for doing nearshore restoration in Puget Sound. This is an example of the Lummi Peninsula in Whatcom County. And here we found a whole bunch of different properties where it looks like we're ready to go for armor removal. There were homes there that were set well back from the bluff crest. So why is this armor there? It doesn't need to be there. Well, it does. There's an access road that's the only way to get around to that part of the peninsula that is heavily armored. And so, okay, this turned up some existing problem spots for us. And, you know, yeah, it didn't necessarily account for that access road, and that would be a thing that would need to happen. We'd need to reconfigure that access road entirely in order to enable, you know, holistic restoration of this really long piece of shoreline. That would be really lovely to have in a more natural state, but, you know, the work continues. So what's next? Now that we've done this preliminary study, we'd love to go ahead and refine the approach. So, you know, we've got this question of if this house can relocate out of this sort of warning zone, but we can put some additional constraints on it. What if there's wetlands or other known critical areas or steep slopes that would preclude home relocation? That's something that we could do as a remote exercise. Another thing that we can do is we can identify or otherwise flag those areas where there's larger infrastructure challenges that are precluding armor restoration, armor removal and shore restoration. So like this example here, where we have a BNSF train line that is protected by armor in Whatcom County. As long as the train's there, that armor's not going away. And then the other thing we can do is we're looking at evaluating the impacts of, or incorporating work that's being done by others in the region to evaluate this kind of setback necessity and feasibility in light of different rates of bluff recession and in response to climate change, because bluff erosion is uneven across the region based on local wind-driven sort of storm regimes, precipitation events, stratigraphy, different elements that drive different components of bluff erosion. So this is an example of a pre-publication study that Eric Grossman and the folks at USGS are working on that's looking at localized bluff recession projections. We can use that, and we can use those projections to create a more time-sensitive understanding of what needs to be moved when, or what may become threatened when, at a local scale across the region. I'll wrap this up. Other things we're looking to do, we're looking to expand the scope. So we're currently pursuing funding to conduct this study on the remaining 8 counties around Puget Sound. We'll see how that goes. And then the last piece of it is we want to put the results of the study to work. So we've shared the results of the study with Lisa of the Northwest Straits Foundation, and she is going to talk about how they're using the results of this study and other work like it that they have supported to drive targeted outreach and restoration in Puget Sound. So that's what I've got.
I think we have time for one clarifying question. Do we have any questions on Zoom? Okay, no questions on Zoom. Any clarifying questions in the room? Yeah, go for it.
Okay, excellent presentation, also nice slides. As the session mentioned, it's from science to action. So I just want to ask you, what is the most critical way that you use to take your scientific data to on the ground?
Yeah, I think that's a lovely setup for the talk that Lisa's going to get into, because the organization that I work for, we partner with Lisa and other shore-friendly sort of lead entities to provide some of those homeowner outreach opportunities and to talk to people about, you know, this is a really ugly piece of armor you've got here. I bet we could get you something better and we could actually get some happy salmon in here. But that's a big part of it, is just, you know, not every site is going to be suitable for restoration for any number of reasons, for landowner willingness, for geographic context, for, you know, some parcels are real itty bitty. And so being able to target our resources effectively is really the goal of this kind of study, is, you know, making sure that people aren't running around talking to homeowners where there's not much that can be done.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Lisa can probably elaborate on that question too for using the applied sciences.
Yeah, I have a question about that too, Ellie. But how, can you talk a little bit about your QA/QC and like ground truthing the data? Because we try to do this kind of analysis and it's like
Oh, yeah.
The data cleanup proves to be like kind of the insurmountable hurdle.
Oh my gosh, we could have a lengthy conversation about this after the talk,
I'd just be
but
interested, like.
yeah. No, a big part of it is just, having, one of the advantages for the group that I work with is that we have, folks who have been working in their particular part of the industry for a really long time. And so, I can run a spatial tool and I can come up with some initial evaluations of, okay, here's how we've turned complicated real world concepts into geographic shapes and representations that are trying to make something meaningful together. And that's always going to be a little insufficient. But I can run a tool like that and I can put together some initial outputs and then I can put it to a coastal geomorphologist who's been in the industry for 15 years and she can visually review the results and ask questions of them and say, hey, this bluff crest looks a little funky to me. This building is in a place that it doesn't seem to make sense. And then we can start to compile a list of those sort of apparent errors that we're encountering. And we can have a dialogue about, okay, it seems like this error is coming from this sort of systematic oversight in the data. Okay, how do we build a mechanic that accounts for that? So that's usually what it looks like, is it's a bit of an iterative process for us of, doing our best approach at asking questions of the data and representing real world phenomena, and then asking questions again and asking questions again, because we can get closer. But it is always a struggle too, with like, at a certain point, it's tempting to just look at every parcel and every output from the tool and try to make everything perfectly represented for that individual instance of a thing on the ground. And I've definitely fallen into that rabbit hole many times before.
It is, especially when you're dealing with the actual implementation is at that individual parcel.
Yeah. No, and I'm sure that we'll get feedback as Lisa and her team start to work with the data too, of like, hey, we noticed that this piece of it isn't quite doing what we need it to. Let's go back to the drawing board and make the next generation of this tool work even better. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of just knowing the people to ask, is this right? Or at least that's how it typically works out for my organization. Yeah, wonderful question, thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And yeah, you set us up perfectly for our next talk from Lisa Kaufman.
Thank you. So, despite the fact that we all work very closely together, there's going to be some overlap in some of our slides, some of the discussion points. But I just want to provide a little bit of clarification first, just actually probably introduce myself. So I do work for a nonprofit. We put the emphasis on the non in the profit part of it. We work across about 7 counties or so in the greater Puget Sound region for our shore-friendly and our nearshore restoration work. But we also work really throughout the entire region, from all the way up in Whatcom County, where most of us are located, all the way down to the southern end of Puget Sound on other work we do as well, removing derelict fishing gear and providing monitoring for a lot of restoration activities. So we're a small organization of 7 of us, and we cover a pretty broad area of work. But you've heard from both Bob and Lauren this number of like 60% of our shorelines are in private ownership. And when we refer to that, you say, well, yeah, most private properties are owned by private landowners. But in this particular context, it's not just their land, it's the tidelands. It's the beaches that are actually in some weird conglomeration of, you can be standing on one beach, one section of a beach, and it's owned by the state. You can be standing in another section of the beach and take 20 steps forward, and you're still maybe on private property. And then the next one, you might be on state property. And then the next one, you might be on private property or some kind of local government property. When Washington State became a state, they were land rich and cash poor. So they literally sold off tideland parcels by the parcel unit. So if you had an upland parcel, you had a first right to purchase the tidelands, and then they did it a second time. And so some people were able to purchase their tidelands starting out at like the mean high water, and they could purchase out to mean low. And then they did another sale where you could potentially purchase out to extreme low. So we have this crazy jigsaw puzzle of tideland ownership. And people hold strong to their ownership, whether they know they own it or not. Everybody assumes they own their beaches, and that's what they refer to. It's my beach, I own my beach. But in some cases they may not, but in most cases they do. It's kind of crazy. It's a really weird setting to have to try and operate in. And mostly because a lot of this armor we're referring to, these bulkheads, these seawalls, these groins, they cross the paths of ownership in many cases. We want them, if they have to have shoreline armor, or if they've already it's been put in, it has to be as far back as possible. So that might very well be on their property, or they might be encroaching on state property, or county property, or city property, or their neighbor's property for that matter. Because our tideland parcels also were not necessarily plotted straight lines out from their individual homes. They go in weird angles. It also has to do with whether they were maybe given their tidelands before statehood. It's so complicated. And I had the pleasure for 9 years of working in that world, working for the state Department of Natural Resources that manages those slivers of tidelands. But as you heard before, I'm gonna kind of start talking a little bit more of like the application of the data, as well as just how we actually engage with shoreline property owners, and how we're trying to expand our discussions with landowners to not just can we remove armor, but how can we make our shorelines more resilient to climate change. And we do take it from primarily a species and habitat lens, but we merge the social science with the biological sciences, with the physical sciences all together to kind of come to this educational perspective. And we try and also engage at sort of that one-on-one or a community level point of view where we're trying to find common ground. Our perspective again is from how can we protect habitat, these iconic species that Bob mentioned, our Puget Sound salmon, our iconic orca whales, which hopefully if you all come to visit us, the first thing you're gonna be trying to do is, can I go out on a whale, a whale watching excursion? The first thing we're gonna say is, no, go here and stand on the land. Don't go in a boat that makes a lot of noise. But these are species that have cultural importance, they have significant financial and economic importance to us. So there's a lot of reasons, and also just the biodiversity as well. Everybody in this room understands the need for biodiversity. So that's kind of the lens that we're working from. We also, when we go out to these, private properties, the shore-friendly program is like, we kind of work on this one-on-one sort of effort, starting with really in this kind of group effort of doing workshops. But when we go out to a private property and we start talking with landowners, even public and private, folks that we engage with, they are not in denial about sea level rise and changing conditions. We don't get into those broader conversations of why it's happening or what's causing it. We stop at that point. There's no need to have those debates. Again, we just try and find those common goals. Hey, do you love just being able to watch those birds? Do you love being able to see the salmon, coming up the stream that's, down the shoreline from you? That's where we start from, so that we can actually talk in a way that we can all connect together. But all these landowners know it, they see it happening, they feel it, that's why they contact us, that's why they respond to our outreach, because they're terrified in most cases of what might happen to their ownership, their properties, their homes that they love, and their views. That's really, everybody moves to the shorelines of the Sound, or even anywhere around here, because they want to view, they want to touch, they want to smell the shorelines, whether they understand the impacts that's having or not.
Yeah.
And if you want me to put it in the New York, New Jersey context, I can do that. I grew up actually here, so I can speak New York if you need me to. Standing my tone down, kind of Northwest version of saying this. But as you heard from Bob too, we span all over the region, and that's really the key to this program too. Is this collaborative effort of us saying the same thing over and over again across the entire region. Common messages are what get our landowners to say, well, I have a friend, or a family member that lives down in Olympia. Are they gonna be able to have the same resource? Can I tell them about this? And it's gonna be the same thing over and over again. We approach it a little bit differently, but the messaging is the same. These species are important, the habitats are important, and most importantly, the processes, the sediment that falls from our bluffs is really important to their protection of their habitat in their homes, as well as the habitat that we all are caring about from the species perspective. Sediment actually is providing a natural armor, as long as it's not interrupting, really. So erosion is a conversation we have to have with landowners. They fear it, we need it. They need it, they just don't understand that they need it. Bob already kind of talked a little bit about our forage fish and kind of these three species of fish that we kind of focus in on. Two spawn right on the intertidal, anywhere from like the mid-intertidal range all the way up to the high tide line. That's those surf smelt and sand lands that Bob talked about. We also have herring that spawn out in our eelgrass beds, which are right offshore. Both of these habitats, the shoreline itself, the beaches, the sediment, are definitely at risk from climate change and from sea level rise, as well as our eelgrass beds, because eelgrass is a flowering plant. It requires sunlight in order to grow. And our eelgrass beds that span the entire region are certainly at risk from sedimentation, from chemical inputs, but they are the nurseries for all of the species really of Puget Sound. You talk a crab, an invertebrate, in some way, every single species throughout the region is connected to our eelgrass beds and our kelp beds. And so it's not just the beaches that are important, but when you start putting in armor on our shorelines, you create a static system. So with sea level rise, those habitats can't migrate landward. So we're going to lose those species, lose those habitats. And it also, once you put in a hardened shore, think about kind of that wave action you see during like big storms. That becomes just like this increasing energy system, right? As opposed to you're standing on this lovely beach that has a gradual incline to it. During a storm, yeah, there's going to be some higher energy, but that water hits that gravel, that sand, and it just trickles through and percolates back out. As Bob already mentioned, and probably Lauren as well, that armor also is a way of increasing erosion. It hits that wall, it takes all those sediments and all that natural protection out to sea, and doesn't allow it to continue to build up throughout the processes. So kind of put a little bit different way, and since Bob stole the show on armor impacts. Oh, shit, oh, sorry. Okay. Again, Bob already kind of talked about the impacts of habitat fragmentation. We're trying to reconnect our shorelines. We're trying to take our shorelines and make it so that they're not three separate systems of uplands, beach, and water. We want them all interacting together. We need insects falling from trees to actually feed our salmon and all the other fish and critters. And we need to have trees and on the shorelines for stability as well, and reducing that impact of erosion. So Bob mentioned that parcel segmentation. Originally in the inception of Shore Friendly, they created this matrix of potential restoration opportunities. We still use this. It's at this parcel scale level. Highest priority segments are those with armor, low to medium erosion rates, and with an additional lens of habitat and species. Now, again, what we're trying to incorporate too, this area that's circled here, this is our high erosion rate areas with buildings on them that we basically ignored all this time, kind of assuming that, well, we're never going to be able to do work in those areas because nobody's ever going to move their house. And if we remove armor that's already installed, you have what's referred to as deferred erosion, where all that sediment that's been building up, eroding behind that bluff, or behind that armor, that bulkhead, is now going to continue to slide in a mass event. And it's going to accelerate up the bluff until it finds its equilibrium. So nobody wants to experience that. So we were kind of told to just not really talk about, retreat and relocation, but we can't ignore these because this is our primary sediment source to supply our shorelines and maintain our habitats and species. So now with the addition of some of this data, we have the data to back it. This is just kind of a promo showing you what some of the work we have done before. Our tiny little organization has removed about a mile of shoreline. Most of it has been on public lands, but we use those public sites actually as demonstrations for private landowners as well, with an understanding that their level of risk and risk tolerance is much different than what a public property can withstand. So how are we doing this? How do we change landowners' perspectives and their relation to their property, the value they place on it, their enjoyment of it? We really need to flip the switch on what their risk tolerance is. Is their risk of loss of property, does it outweigh their desire to kind of wait it out and pass it on to another landowner? So this is sort of the crux of the question that we keep trying to work on. So we have some challenges as we sort of approach this conversation about removing houses, moving them back, and really that comes down to those emotional attachments as that first key thing. We also have another issue too, in that the majority of, at least in our northern region where we work, most homes along the shoreline are on septics. Do you want your septic to kind of be within that range of the shoreline? I certainly don't. The fish don't want it, we don't want it. There's human health and wellness issues as well. So we need to know where those utilities are located. Is there also room, not just to move the house, but can we relocate those utilities? And are the landowners willing to take that on versus thinking about, oh, well, can I move my house or can I wake up tomorrow morning and I will be in my house in the water? And it's happened in Puget Sound. many times. So these are kind of the array of the challenges that we have. And we're trying to push the dial constantly now on the discussion in our region about relocation. So over the last 10 years, we haven't ignored, these higher erosion rate areas. We've simply provided them with other resources. Can you add more vegetation? Can you manage your drainage so that your drainage isn't actually the cause? Because most erosion, while it is wind and wave driven, larger mass scale events, with the exception of areas that are deep-seated landslide locations that have been poorly allowed to, to be developed upon, the causes of mass slides are from improper land management. Somebody leaving a hose or not having their downspouts managed in a proper way, causing, and also deforestation of our shorelines is probably one of the key things too. So how can we manage those? And that's how we've been tackling it to date. And again, now with this data that we have, we can say, here's your home. You have the ability to move it. All of our reports, every landowner that we go to for doing a site visit as part of our program gets an individualized report. And now, over the last handful of years, I've required our consultants to say, pretty early in their report, here's your setback. You have room to move or you don't have room to move. You don't have to think about it now. You should think about it later. So it's right in their face. It's not something they can kind of continue to ignore. Lauren already sort of talked about the varying scales of outreach and how we would approach this. Armored versus unarmored is always going to be kind of our thing. We've battled back and forth. Unarmored shorelines, preventing new armor, much cheaper. But now we're in that pressure zone of people, definitely having this fear of erosion and increasing with climate change. So we're looking at scales of greatest, setback distances that we can work with. How much further back can somebody move their house? That'll be a higher priority. And we do it at different scales. Broad outreach, community-wide, at the community level, like neighbors to neighbors, and at that parcel scale. These are some of the tools we've put together. We took advantage of the pandemic and made a whole series of videos. And our two latest ones, one is not out yet, that's just a preview, and the reason that it's in the block is because I'm changing the title of the video before it comes out. We have these shore-friendly living videos, and the last two are on smart development. One is developing an existing property with moving a house. The other that is out already is how to develop from a blank slate. And then we have workshops, we send out flyers and notices to everybody. Haley, who's also in the room here with me, she's kind of leads some of our outreach efforts. So she's got a big handle on every single parcel around the region of who's had outreach and who hasn't. And then we do have a couple properties that we are kind of taking little tiptoe steps along with. These are both up in the North Sound here. One is on an area called Lummi Island, where these people have literally like no setback whatsoever. We're working with them to identify opportunities for moving their house back, but then they also are going to need significant vegetation management and drainage management. This one house, this is on the left, they don't actually have shoreline armor, so we're looking at a full-on prevention of new armor from being installed, because the one thing armor doesn't do is actually prevent erosion, and it does not prevent flooding on our low-lying parcels too. This other one here, you can see this kind of house right here. They were actually moving or taking that down and actually building further back. And the county, when they asked, well, we still going to have erosion issues, can we put in a bulkhead, can we replace the bulkhead that's there? The county and the state all said no. So they're not obligated to remove that bulkhead, but they're interested in removing that bulkhead. So once their house is rebuilt and that other house is demolished, we're going to come in and we're going to help them to remove that armor. And we just had a call actually a couple weeks ago from their neighbor who actually also wants a site visit, so hopefully we'll be able to expand our outreach. Although we've heard from the actual people we're working with that they will probably never remove their bulkhead. So where do we go from here? This is kind of just sort of our multi-Venn diagram, of course. Our focus is always going to be continuing our outreach and continuing to provide technical assistance. Now we're going to look at those pathways to restoration. Can we remove a house? Can we get to that armor removal and continue to maintain those coastal processes that are so necessary? And then we'll also still work within the confines of, can we work on the political will of our regulators and our county commissioners throughout the region to change their perspectives as well. We're looking at more funding mechanisms. We're trying to institute, not we as in the Northwest Straits, but the overall program. It's looking at opportunities for no-cost and low-cost loans, not just for home relocation. Primarily, it's really looking at a restoration perspective, but we've been poking at that and saying we have to have the home relocation added to it. And then also, can we affect policy and planning changes as well through the program? By just really coordinating with more of our partners. So that's it. Sorry that I was a little bit late, and sorry for the, I brought my Jersey girl out in me. It does happen despite having not lived back here for 25, 30 some odd years.
Well, thank you so much for this talk. I think in the interest of time, I'm gonna pass it right to Chris, and I think Lisa, you teed Chris up well. I don't know if Chris has the answers, but talking about the regulatory and the land use side of things. So Chris, take it away.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'm Chris Elder. I'm a senior planner with Whatcom County Public Works. Just real quick, how many of y'all are students? How many of y'all are consultants? How many of y'all are government? And what did I miss?
Academic.
Academic. Well, thanks. So I'll do my best. I'm running the Whatcom Future Shorelines project, so we kind of named it. Just briefly, I have a relationship with all four of these individuals here. Sydney has been on my project team for phase 1 and phase 2 of this, and a big support. Bob is one of my grant managers, not related to this, but to a different project. Lisa, we're working on some of these home relocations, trying to do some pilot funding as well. And then Lauren's firm is the primary consultant that is actually helping me execute this project. So the coordination is real. So this project is, again, trying to take a lot of the science and the data that you've kind of heard of and trying to actually activate it within kind of the local government framework, which I'll tell you has been painful. And one of the things in the plenary, I missed part of it, but there was the one social scientist talking about how the importance of data was not important to her. And I'll say from a local government standpoint, if I don't have key, informed, accurate data, then the policy is never going to happen. So the three main cogs there, which are kind of mostly what I'll go over, trying to complete a vulnerability assessment just to get a better sense for how vulnerable are our assets and ecosystems, try to jump a little bit deeper into the adaptation strategies, and ultimately try to land on that policy considerations. Some of the goals, I have my project team for this phase 2 is 50 individuals. It includes all 7 small cities in our county, both the tribes. We have Washington Sea Grant, kind of our NGO, educational academic organization, State Department of Ecology, State Department of Fish and Wildlife, and State Department of Natural Resources, as well as our local port. Just to real quickly, these are kind of the 4 primary tasks we're working through, trying to actually do that marine and riverine vulnerability assessment. I'll show you here in a sec, but we're actually taking future riverine floods, trying to intersect that with sea level rise planning and actually see where those vulnerabilities lie, doing that adaptation planning, picking one of the frontline communities to do a specific adaptation plan, but also trying to develop some adaptation strategies that can apply within that full risk zone. Task 3 is getting right to that policy component. SMP stands for our Shoreline Master Program. That is a State Department of Ecology administered regulation, and that's again, I think part of the challenge. The federal government is not telling us you have to plan for sea level rise. And we're in the scenario in Washington State where even our state government is not telling us we are required to plan for sea level rise, which is part of why I get funding from the state, because they want me to figure it out so they can kind of take all my lessons learned and hopefully turn it into policy. And then the comp plan and land use codes, this is kind of our local guiding document in our actual regulatory environment. And of course, the final step is trying to memorialize it in a document, present it to the actual policymakers, and hopefully start to implement some of the actions. I know you all know this, but just briefly to give the backdrop of data, Puget Sound has seen roughly 8 inches of sea level rise in the past 100 years. And on the right side there, you're all probably climate savvy, but that RCP 8.5 is kind of the business as usual scenario, high emissions, but we're not changing that. So you can see, there's somewhere between, 0.8 feet to 8 full feet over the next 100 years. So some wide sideboards to work around. Washington State, we're a little bit spoiled because Sydney and Department of Ecology and kind of our University of Washington Climate Impacts Group has done some incredible work to provide a lot of the technical data available to us. I would encourage you, if you live in a state that does not have access to these sorts of resources, good options out of Washington. So I flagged kind of the riverine component. So the one additional bit that I get to work on is whenever we have these mega river flood events, and I'll just say in the Nooksack Basin, we have projections of up to 75% greater flood magnitudes than our current 100-year flood extent. So when you combine that huge mega flood with increasing sea surfaces, we have increased vulnerabilities where those intersect. So just to give you a visual reference, see if I can just go over to the screen. So, Bellingham is right here. There's where the actual river comes out. This is our Lummi Nation Reservation, where we have one of our Indian tribes. Other Native American tribes are in here, both kind of partially in the floodplains. But the current floodplain extent is roughly 82 square miles, and based on these kind of future climate projections, that magnitude of impact increases by an additional 20 square miles, which is huge. Just a couple snapshots. We had a 100-year flood just 4 years ago. I was actually on the flood response team, so out there when the river started coming over the roadways, enormous damage. I think 900 homes were substantially damaged. This is river flooding. But along the shoreline, also have enormous impacts regularly. So even without, significant climate sea level rise, the storm events are already kind of impacting communities. And this is just kind of a demonstration, historic photos. Back in 1982, there was a mega storm in this Birch Bay community that I'll get into here in a little bit more detail. Briefly, so back to the data component, the big piece that we've kind of seen today is just kind of that exposure. Where does the impact run based on these different sea level rise scenarios? Sensitivity is a little bit more delicate or informed. We try to actually have kind of our project team determine, how do you figure out how sensitive is this house or that trail or that road or that ecosystem. So I don't know, this is like the standard framework for vulnerability assessment. Sometimes I feel like we always come back just to the exposure. People want to see like how impacted. There's a little bit more of a kind of a qualitative component to the sensitivity. Adaptive capacity gets at what can you do. If a trail gets flooded, the waters go down, no big deal. If a home gets flooded, more impactful, less able to kind of adapt or recover. That's where you move into relocation or other adaptation strategies. So for our project, we took a range of scenarios, and it will say, I don't think I have a slide in here, but we were lucky in Whatcom County and now most of Puget Sound to have the U.S. Geological Survey Cosmos data, coastal storm modeling system. So that shows, storm surge, wind direction, barometric pressure, in addition to these different sea level rise scenarios. So we had this kind of data more or less given to us. We did pay them for it, part of it, which helped. But the key scenarios that we selected are circled here. So, roughly there's a 1% chance by the 2040s we'll have up to a 0.8, 0.9 foot of sea level rise, roughly 1 foot. And we modeled out that both coastal storm event of 20 years and the riverine storm event of 25 years. And again, that discharge increase, 32%, indicates by the 2040s, we're expecting roughly a 32% larger riverine flood. So trying to map out that compound flood component. And by the 2080s, that 1% likelihood is somewhere between 3.1 and 3.3 feet. And we mapped out that 25-year storm event as well, and a 72% increase in that riverine flood event. And just briefly, these are the scenarios that whenever I present to my county council, this is the degree of likelihood that we're trying to plan around. So we picked one community, highly vulnerable. It was a focus area in phase 1 of our project. It's an unincorporated urban growth area, so it's not a city, doesn't have city government, but the county kind of manages and promotes higher density growth in this area, so it's under county control. And as you've seen, it's had kind of repeated impacts due to storm events over time. So we're trying to develop this pilot adaptation plan to address those vulnerabilities and identify some adaptation actions. So here's the current floodplain, 100-year FEMA floodplain. You get on that future floodplain, and to a certain degree, it's not enormously different. So it's kind of been interesting from my perspective. We have FEMA floodplain regulations. We don't really have sea level rise future flood regulations. But the FEMA floodplain regulations kind of allow you to build, you can build with mitigating actions. There's this question on, are the current mitigating actions sufficient when you consider more regular inundation? So what could be a 1%, 100-year flood event that happens once, maybe twice in your lifetime, compared to the future floodplain being more of a once every 5 years, once every 2 years type of event. So whenever we kind of craft our regulations, it's easier for me to kind of point back. We're not really changing the geographic scope enormously, but we are likely going to try to change the adaptation actions. I just put this one back up here. Everyone always asks when is the hazard going to hit? And we try to kind of avoid putting a number on it, but people want the number. I don't have an answer for that one, just so you know. So again, I kind of just flag this. One of the components with that rising sea level is not just the change of extent of flooding, but the fact that it will become more common. Okay. So I'm just going to go through a few maps just to kind of visually represent. You can see our current 100-year floodplain already touches a lot of these properties with that 0.8 feet and just a king tide. So this could be an annual event. So the number of homes that get impacted. When we go to that 0.8 feet plus a 20-year storm event, even more. I'm going to keep rolling. We get here to that 3.3 foot of sea level rise with the king tide, and that floodplain becomes fully inundated. So go ahead. Gotcha. So again, just trying to visually give you the representation that even though some of these developments already exist in a known floodplain, we've kind of allowed and in some cases even encouraged growth in them because we have these mitigating actions. And the question is, are these mitigating actions sufficient? I think the answer is no. Lisa already kind of demonstrated some of these slides, so I'll kind of go through. That's our current extreme high water event. A lot of the work that Lauren and other coastal planners have done tries to flag where will that future erosion be. With that USGS Cosmos model, we've been able to kind of map out that potential change over time. It's kind of light colors, and we actually kind of did a little bit of band of uncertainty. But even on just this one bluff, you can see that that band of uncertainty touches, 30, 50 homes, and the ability for them to relocate is practically zero. And we get very close to public right-of-ways as well. The other component that I don't think we've talked about yet is access, ingress, and egress. A lot of these facilities or a lot of these residences, the primary road to get to them will be underwater under a shorter time period. So what happens when public access is no longer there? So just to throw some numbers at you, so under that 0.8 feet scenario, there's roughly 1,300 homes that are impacted. And under that 3.3 foot scenario, an additional 861. So just in that one community of Birch Bay, I have roughly 2,100 homes that I have to figure out what to do with. And this is our comprehensive plan. This is where we plan for growth and development. At the same time, I'm trying to figure out what to do with these existing homes. The county planning department is trying to put another 1,000 homes in the same area. So there's that push and pull between climate hazards and housing for all. Just to be aware of my time check here. So, just to put in a few parameters, and this is a long list that you're all probably familiar with, but whenever we're trying to determine adaptation policies, what hazard are we tackling? What's the lever used? Is it incentive-based? Is it a regulatory action? What asset are we addressing? What's its relevance compared to just promoting new development somewhere else? Timeframe for protection, who's gonna do it? Who's gonna pay for it? How big is it? What maintenance does it need? And so on. So when we lined out all these adaptation actions, tried to demonstrate, and this is part of when we communicate to county council, what is the magnitude of the duration of that protection? Short term for 1 year, you could put sandbags, or you can have your emergency responders be more informed on how to respond. The near term would be to revise codes, update policies that kind of mitigate kind of existing impacts. But when we get to that long game, soft shore armoring, habitat restoration, and really that long term, is focusing mostly on the code. How do we restrict development in these hazardous areas? And how do we relocate those assets outside of a hazard zone? Some of the key recommendations are, you're probably familiar with the purchase of development rights program, where we basically pay a property owner to pull their ability to develop off of that. The transfer of development rights would be to have a private entity. I'm sure New York has done this, where they will pay someone in a wetland or a sea level rise zone to buy their development right and put it in a high rise. So Seattle's done a lot of that. We've not done that in Whatcom County. Engagement and outreach, a lot of what Northwest Straits Foundation and other partners support. Home relocation, this is kind of the big one. Who's gonna pay for it? Federal government is no longer available. State government is also in a budget crisis. County government is also in a county or in a budget crisis. I don't have an answer to that. And I think that's where a lot of us are stuck. Who is gonna pay the bill? And then we have this kind of climate hazard overlay. So again, from a regulatory standpoint, how do I ensure that planners moving forward, if you're working local government or ever submitted your own building permit, there's a person in office that kind of sees your parcel, reads the code, says yes or no, you can do it or not. If we don't have some way to actually codify it, to get it in the county code, I can't expect, future planner to know, oh, it's in a climate hazard zone. So this is part of what we're flirting with up in my jurisdiction, to actually create a new overlay. Regardless of underlying zoning, it will be identified as a climate hazard, and therefore it has to meet XYZ provisions. And then that last one, how do we promote and kind of provide growth alternatives outside of the hazard area? And that's, seems like a no-brainer, but it's been harder to get across the board. Since I'm probably out of time, this is just kind of some rapid snapshots. We had a workshop with the community, broke out that Birch Bay area into 6 different geographies, allowed community members to walk through and just kind of get a sense for what their vulnerability was, and flag what those hazards were, gave their overall climate vulnerability score, identified the assets at risk, recommended some initial potential strategies, and then tried to gather their feedback. We had roughly 50 individuals from that community attend. And having those visuals with the map, people coming up like, oh, there's my home, it's in the danger zone. There's some good awareness there. We did have a website. I assume our slides will get posted somewhere, so I'd encourage you. We have a live story map, as well as our phase 1 report, and this phase 2 report will be wrapping up at the end of the month. So I encourage you to go check that out. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Chris. For the remaining time, I think we left a good amount of time for discussion, so if I can invite all the panelists to come sit up here and join me at the front. Or should I can sit in the middle. Is that weird to sit in the middle? I don't know, it's not about me.
I was aiming for the quick. Well, now we're out of order, but that's fine.
That's okay. So yeah, I think let's, I brainstormed a couple questions, but I know we also had some questions from the audience. So maybe first I'll ask, was there any question on Zoom? No, okay. Any larger questions from the audience? Okay, first hand that I saw.
I can start it. So I kind of actually had 2 questions. One, I think there's a lot of really interesting research in archaeology and anthropology programs looking at like clam gardens and natural ways to sort of armor shorelines, and I wonder if y'all have thought about that. And the other one, I think Chris, your presentation started to touch on it, but when you think about relocating people, especially in a place like Washington, where there is such a crazy like cultural divide, ecological divide, when you go over the Cascade Crest, and thinking about like if you were to relocate people off of the coast and maybe they end up in eastern Washington, you start dealing with like water rights issues. How do you think about that connectivity? And then maybe like relative, like people talk about Cascadia a lot, like with talking about Canada, is there any sort of like collaboration like in the conversation around connectivity? So yeah.
Can you define what you mean by connectivity?
Like where, if you are relocating people, where do they go and what are those pipelines? And I think it came up a little bit with like the migration, specifically with human migration, of like where are people drawn to and where do people end up? Does that help?
Yeah, as far as I know, Canada hasn't quite opened the doors to us.
Yeah, I think that Canada and Cascadia is a little bit more like learning lessons from each other as opposed to movement, but.
I definitely have a couple cross-border collaborations, especially with the Nooksack River flooding. There's actually a transboundary collaborative team. Since our new administration, they've actually started keeping their cards a little closer to their chest, so collaboration's tightened up a little bit. Just to tackle the relocation question, I mean, one of the things I'm gonna recommend to my county council and hope we can do is actually have the county acquire a block of land that is fully outside of a hazard zone and try to facilitate some of that relocation. So if someone has a home in that Birch Bay community, I didn't really show it, but you know, there's multiple mobile home parks and a lot of low-income individuals that live. Because it used to be, you had a question, it used to be like a recreational summer home place that people would go there in the summer, and then over time people just kind of became permanent. But if local government actually could acquire land to facilitate that home relocation, it could really make it an easier go.
So let me add to that a little bit. So our counties in where we work, North Puget Sound, there's a shoreline and the cities are along the shoreline, but really that if you were to set it back, it's agricultural land. And so I think that would be a place, as far as impacts to habitat, would be a place to relocate people. There's this thriving agricultural culture that would be very much put off for that. I think it would be super difficult to convince people that that's the right way to go.
And there's also the question of where do we want our food coming from?
There's that question
You know,
too.
do you want it coming from China and other places, or do we want, we have amazing local agriculture that certainly has its own impacts. But knowing that, you can go and get food from, within a 20 or 50 mile range, and it's very local and feeding a very significant population is still really important too. So there are definitely counties like Skagit County, despite a lot of the other political issues that they have there, there's definitely a lot of regulations on conversion of ag lands, which is important. We don't necessarily want to see those converted, but we want to also see room in those ag lands for, in our case, habitat and species migration too. I can touch a little bit maybe on the clam garden thing. It's not necessarily something that we look at from a shoreline armor perspective. The living shoreline concepts that you maybe see on the East Coast, and maybe in the South, don't necessarily apply as much to our region. We are trying to remove structure because of that need for maintaining sediment supply. Clam gardens are certainly, they are finding a resurgence, particularly within our North Sound region, from a cultural perspective on those, those tribes bringing back their local food sources and taking care of themselves. There's also, we have one particular project that's not on private lands that we're working on, where we had considered, can we work with the tribe and actually put in a clam garden where maybe had been some historical uses there, but we also have European green crab infestations too. So we want to make sure that in the restoration actions that we employ, that we also don't provide habitat for invasive species. And also when you're talking about clam gardens, we have a dynamic as well in terms of shared resources with tribes. And so if there's a harvestable commodity, the tribes need to be able to have, there's at least 50% that belongs to the tribes and they have a right to that. So you also don't want to infringe on their rights by now allowing, at say a public park, an entire community of people infringing on those harvestable rights too. So it's more complicated. But clam gardens are certainly finding their way back, and we love hearing about it from our local tribal partners. So. Sorry, Bob, you were saying?
Well, I was just gonna say cultural, because your other question was about archaeology.
Yeah.
Cultural resources is one of the biggest issues that we have as far as getting something done, because of our local, we have very strong presence of tribes in the Pacific Northwest. And your question is right on the mark. So a lot of times these armored banks are protecting cultural resources that are buried in the sediments behind them. And so when we remove them, if there is some type of cultural resource there, it can be extremely difficult to get that permitted in it. And also these projects that are like the low cost projects, and this person will be screaming at me like, they are, the cultural resources can be so expensive that sometimes it makes it so the projects are not even feasible because we don't have enough money to pay for the cultural resources, investigations, and the restoration. It just doesn't make sense financially, so it's a big issue.
And the time it would take to go through the whole process. Where are you from?
I'm I'm from Connecticut originally, but I did my PhD in Washington, and worked with the CEOs. But I'm a water resources engineer, so I am more riverine systems. But my partner studied clam gardens in an archaeology program and the armoring effect of near shore and long shore drift, so I, had to ask that question. For what y'all are thinking
Yeah, in
about.
fact, some of them actually almost end up as like acting like a groin. But actually, most of what they're, the locations they're putting them in are actually gonna be lower in the intertidal zones. So you're not gonna see them really up next to the, the toes of the bluff, so it doesn't, from my knowledge, it won't have as big of an impact.
I don't know, so.
It's a good thing, but we also have conflicts in sometimes.
I think I saw that hand and then we'll go up here.
I think mostly Lisa and Chris, but everybody, can you talk a little bit to how people have reacted to hearing about their risk more broadly? Maybe not on the individual case by case, but it could be either. And then what tools, particularly graphics or language, have you used to share that information out? Just to get a little specific around that, because it's the conversation, the communication is so challenging.
We probably have two different perspectives maybe on how people are reacting, because it depends on the point of view that you're coming from, I would imagine. Because our program in Shore Friendly is completely voluntary. The people that come to us are the people that probably want help. It doesn't mean that we don't have people that, come to our workshops as kind of the naysayers. We've certainly had all of that. And they're there to make sure too that we're not bringing regulators into their backyard. But for the most part, if somebody contacts us, they have a need. And so the conversations are still challenging. But again, it's kind of, as I mentioned, it's sort of finding that common ground of us really being honest with them about their risk, relative to their single parcel and their neighbors. We do try and put it in kind of that coastal processes context of, you can't control nature at a parcel scale. So we are honest with them about their setbacks, we're honest with them about the impacts they're having and the impacts that they're actually experiencing. And I think they probably appreciate it, but we certainly get some pushback every once in a while. But we don't necessarily get the people that don't agree with it. They're not gonna come to us because it's all voluntary. We do, because there's a change in regulations that have happened over the last couple of years where putting in bulkheads is becoming more and more difficult because of the protection of habitat. In that they have a requirement now to prove a need. And so we do still try and get people coming to our program in order to provide the resources for them to prove that need, and we won't do that. We don't get involved in that side of it. We will try and divert them and tell them every single other option that they might have before they can put armor in. But we're not the ones writing those reports or providing that backup documentation. So again, we try and stay on kind of the positive side of it in a really, it's still a challenging conversation to have. And I'm not naive to that, that we're kind of facing some balance issues too.
Whatcom County has had such an enormous riverine flood risk. We have 3.5 communities that are fully in the floodplain. So a lot of our river and flood division is focused on riverine floods. So the coastal communities have been pretty neglected for a long time. So our first community workshop 2 years ago, most people were pretty up in arms on how are we gonna fix my problem now? So a lot of them were having trouble getting bulkheads permitted. They don't see the county responding, and I got a lot of pissed off people. So it's been a little bit of a educational front to break the news it's bad now, but it's gonna get even worse. Not to mention I don't have any resources to provide you. I think the second workshop we just had, I think folks had a little bit more chance to chew on it, or maybe it was a different audience, but did have folks looking at the map oh, I'm in the danger zone. Are you telling me I should sell my house now, or do I have 10 years? So I'm getting a few more of those pointed questions. Just for an example, one individual found his house on the map and he says, well, I know there's 5 houses in this little geography, they're all for sale, and the cheapest one is 1.5 million. It's should the county be providing cost share to demolish or buy out or relocate homes that are that price tag? The answer is no, but so I don't know, there's a mixed bag of answers for you.
I'm kind of just a little bit more on that. We've definitely had a handful of landowners where, particularly on the bluff properties, where they have very limited setbacks, and they get their reports from our coastal geologists or coastal geomorphologists, and it terrifies them. And so the next time we send a postcard out for maybe a different type of workshop, we get a message back from them saying, well, I sold my house, I'm sorry. And then that's a conundrum as well, in that they have a house that is at a high risk of eroding or into the water. But there's nothing that's gonna stop that house from being resold. Despite, we've done outreach to realtors and
Are
other.
there land trusts there that are?
There are, but they're not gonna work at a single parcel scale. They're gonna work at a larger scale of, protecting resources.
Nantucket Land Bank is at
Mhm.
this scale, or what
Yeah.
property owner.
If we had more ownership of tidelands, probably, it might be more feasible for, land trust, land banks to actually purchase at individual parcels. But also in these cases, as Chris mentioned too, you have a house, like the diagram that you showed on that one stretch. You have one house that's on the bluff that's at risk. There's no room to move it, so there's no motivation, for a land trust to purchase anything else because, what are they gonna do? Eventually that bluff is gonna continue to erode back. They're not gonna own anything at that point.
I'll share kind of a frivolous example. Lisa, I just pulled up one of the renderings that we've done this isn't so much for communicating risk as it is for communicating possibility. But, we.
Show and tell.
I had that and deleted that slide.
I love this. So this is an example of a property that we've been working with to try and do armor removal. And we're trying to communicate with the folks on that property like, hey, you've got this lovely coastal property that has some really ugly armor on it. We can do something about that. And so I went out and flew a drone and took some pictures, and can I make the slide go forward? Yes, I can. And we had one of our graphic designers just do a mock-up of, hey, this is what your natural beach could look like after we've come in and replaced native vegetation and put in lower impact paths and taken out that boathouse that you've been worried about having it getting flooded year over year. And so it's not getting at that question of are people, it's not quite answering your question of helping people manage their fear in the face of that kind of climate risk. But it is another way that we communicate with people about hey, this is a cool thing. You want this, and this has been helpful for getting buy-in from their neighbors too, of oh, I want that too, that's pretty, that's nicer than what I've got.
There's a sad story behind that site though.
Yeah.
And that little cabin, actually, we had a husband-wife kind of debate over whether it was okay to move that cabin or get rid of the cabin. And there was an opportunity, when we talked with the house moving company as well, to relocate that little cabin that they had this emotional attachment to further up on the property. But the cabin has been there since the property itself was developed, which way predates these current owners who've been there for 30 years. And at some point in the planning documents, it was noted as being a boathouse. It has never been a boathouse. So in the county's rules, you can't locate a boathouse upland, and so and they don't want accessory units. If it had just been a shed, they could actually, or a shack, they could actually have removed it. And so because the county said no over and over and over again and couldn't get their heads wrapped around removing this armor that would have then included multiple properties, the landowners decided that they want their shed, or they want their little cabin there, and so the project actually is not happening. So a little sad story, but yeah, one of the tools we do use is these design drawings or so, kind of renderings to show them what the possibilities are. In this case, it was definitely going to work until the county got in the way of their own, regulations too, where they want armor removed, but they couldn't get their head wrapped around this one exception.
Which is why we have these partnerships, so we can all talk to each other about the things that don't work.
I know we had a question here and I want to make sure we get to it.
Yeah, so this is probably for Lisa, Bob, or Chris. You guys have talked a lot about the ecological benefits and the ecological purpose of taking away armor from shorelines. And shameless plug for me, I'm actually on a panel in the after lunch session that focuses on applying managed retreat to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And in Hawaii, there's very strong public trust doctrine that includes protecting recreation and protecting the beach line for the purpose of public use. And you guys have talked a lot about this complex system of ownership and how that ownership actually could extend well into the tideland area. And I was curious how that, what the interplay between recreation, public recreation, and the shoreline and shoreline ownership and erosion, what that looks like in in the Puget Sound environment?
Because of that and Chris, you can add on to this too, but because of that complex ownership of tidelands, the public trust doctrine in Washington State is hard to apply. It's been contested numerous times, but has never come to a resolution. The state won't kind of give one way or the other, and it has not succeeded in courts in saying that yes, the tidelands are kind of the ownership of the greater good. So it's definitely, there's a lot of complexities to it. In terms of public use and access, if you own your tidelands, you have every right to say that somebody can't be on those tidelands, but you can't keep them from floating over it because you don't own the water, you own the land. And similarly, the state owns the land and not the water. State Department of Ecology regulates the water, they don't own the water. So the water itself is public access, public use. But you can't step foot on somebody's tidelands potentially. But in terms of the public sphere, state parks in particular, Washington State Parks has just gone through, which Herrera has been working on, a climate resiliency document as well to kind of look at where are all of their facilities at risk too. And we've actually worked in some of those sites that I showed on my very quick slide are actually in public parks, state parks, where we've removed shoreline armor because they're changing perspective as well on use and access. And when you remove hard armor, it actually improves access. One of the terms we use a lot in our shore-friendly program is a messy beach is a healthy beach. So if you can walk over logs and you can walk over beach rack, so eelgrass and everything, that's a healthy beach. It might be a little more challenging for somebody to get onto the beach than walking down, say, a boat ramp or a set of stairs, but it's much easier than walking and trying to climb over a bulkhead. So we do promote that, and as you allow those sediments to build up on the shoreline as well, and you have those natural features, it does provide that natural protection, provided you don't have a home or infrastructure right there at the interface of the marine shorelines. Did I answer your question from my point of view, but Chris may have a different perspective from county.
Keep it brief, so over time. So all shorelines are under the jurisdiction of the Shoreline Master Program, of which public access is a preferred use, but it's not a required use. So I think part of what, as we do this relocation or try to pull that infrastructure back, we'll probably be developing new public access sites. Not required.
Maybe it's $6 million, we actually have a project we're working on to actually improve public access on another state park.
Just one, your investment opportunity.
It's at the interface of the railroad, old infrastructure, and yeah. Do you know? Peyton Beach? Yeah. Yeah, $6 million, all you need.
Well, on that happy note.
I got there for the ribbon cutting.
I want to say thank you everyone for attending. Here's our contact information. Also, we'll be at the conference. You have 2 more days to corner us and ask us more questions. So thank you. Also, thanks everyone on Zoom for joining. And yeah, we look forward to chatting with you more. And now go get some lunch. Don't want to keep you from your lunch.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.